All right, good morning Instagram, good morning Facebook. It is Fitness Athlete Friday. Welcome to Friday. And I am Megan Peach. I am one of the instructors for rehabilitation of the injured runner, both the online and live courses. So we have a couple of live courses coming up, and one in Denver in June and then another in Florida in August. We are also starting our second cohort for rehabilitation of the injured runner online next week. Our first cohort was awesome. We had a lot of really great discussions about running, really good questions about running, and learned a lot ourselves. So we're excited for the second cohort. Make sure you jump on and join us in the future as well. So, tough act to follow from yesterday. Dustin Jones talked about the shoulders we stand on and the big names in PT, and that's a tough act to follow for sure. What I want to talk about today is why we train slow to perform fast, why we run slow to run fast. And it's not entirely different, although we're totally switching gears from yesterday's talk. It's not entirely different because I really just want to bring it back to basics again and bring it back to the foundations for what we know about muscle physiology, what we know about biochemistry, and how that all ties into training. So not unlike yesterday, we're going back to basics. We're going back to our foundations. So stick with me here. It's a bit of a long way around today, but to get started, let's talk about a little bit about what happens when we run fast, what happens when we train at a really high intensity. And we need carbohydrates as an energy source to train at a high intensity. And I'm not necessarily talking about high intensity like doing a 100-meter sprint or doing an assault bike for 60 seconds. I'm talking about high intensity that you might do for, 15, 20, 30 minutes. Something that maybe couldn't be sustained for more than 30 minutes, but something more than a sprint level of intensity. And what happens is that our body is going to use carbohydrates when we are working at high intensity for endurance training. And when we use carbohydrates, our body breaks them down and we get what's called pyruvate as a byproduct. And pyruvate is a molecule and it has a couple of different pathways that it can go to. And one of those pathways is to go into the muscle cell mitochondria. We all know the mitochondria, it's the powerhouse of the cell, and the pyruvate can get into the mitochondria as a way to produce more ATP. Our muscle cells need ATP. It's the only energy source that they can truly use on that cellular level, and regardless of what kind of energy source the muscle cell is using, whether that's carbohydrates or triglycerides or free fatty acids, ultimately they're all going to get turned into ATP to be used by the muscle cell. And so if there is oxygen available and if there is high enough mitochondrial density for the pyruvate to get to, then the pyruvate will go to the mitochondria, and within the mitochondria, with the use of oxygen, it will be transformed into lots and lots and lots of ATP. It's a really good deal for a muscle cell because it needs that ATP to continue working at a high intensity. But there are some limiting factors to that. If there isn't oxygen available and there isn't high enough mitochondrial density, then that pyruvate cannot get into the mitochondria and then be produced or be transferred into ATP. What happens then if it can't get to that step? Then it's going to take another path. And the other path is for that pyruvate to be broken down into lactate and a hydrogen ion. We know this is lactic acid. As athletes, we know that this is a bad thing, not necessarily bad, but we know this as also a limiting factor to activity, because we know that as that lactic acid builds up, then our bodies are no longer going to be able to work at that intensity. And really what it is not so much that lactate molecule that pyruvate has been broken down into that's the limiting factor to that high intensity work. It's more that hydrogen ion. That hydrogen ion is an acid. It increases the acidity of the blood. Our bodies don't like that change in pH. And so what happens when that acidity starts to increase as a result of that pyruvate being broken down into lactate and hydrogen, as a result, that it sends a signal to our brain as a result of the increase in acidity. Our brain says, nope, stop. It sends a message to our body of fatigue, and it basically halts that process. It will not allow us to work at that high intensity for any longer if that acidity gets any higher. So that could certainly be a limiting factor to high intensity exercise. We're going to back up a little bit. So that kind of sets the stage for what might happen if somebody were to just do high intensity training and not incorporate any lower intensity training. So we're going to back up and go and talk about the lower intensity training. And this is training that could be done for 30 minutes or more, 30 minutes up to 2 hours, up to multiple hours of lower intensity work. Often athletes will use the training zone scale, and it's great to use training zones, but we need to be on the same page. We need to talk at the same language, and often athletes will use a 1 to 5 training zone. This isn't true for everyone. There are 1 to 3 training zones. There are 1 to 6. So we just need to be on the same page. Generally speaking, the 1 to 2 training zones are going to be that lower intensity training. Zone 3 is going to be more of a moderate intensity training, around 30 minutes of maybe 20 to 30 minute intervals. And then zones 4 and 5 are going to be more of a higher intensity training, something that couldn't be sustained for more than just maybe 10 seconds to a couple of minutes tops. And so when I'm talking about low intensity training, I am talking about zone 1 and zone 2. And so something that could be sustained for 30 minutes or more without intervals or without rest breaks. And so then we have to go back to our muscle physiology and what we know about muscle fiber types. And what we know about muscle fiber types, so we know that there are basically 3 different types of muscle fibers, and we could even break that down into two different types. So we have a slow twitch and we have a fast twitch. Those terms aren't used as much anymore as the type 1, type 2, and type 2X. So a type 1 would be more of a slow twitch. Those muscle fibers are going to be reserved for low intensity, long duration training. And then we have a type 2 or type 2X fast twitch, reserved for higher intensity, shorter bouts of work. And so when we think about the slow twitch muscle fibers, what we know about them is that they have a high capillary density and they have a high mitochondrial density. And what that means is that with appropriate stimulus, they also have the ability to adapt and to increase their capillary density and increase their mitochondrial density as well. But the slow twitch fibers are really the only ones that are going to do this. The type 2A or fast twitch, but type 2A fibers have a little bit of ability to increase capillary density and tolerate sustained exercise, but not nearly as much as the type 1 fibers. And so we really need that low intensity, long duration exercise to build up these products in the slow twitch type 1 fibers so that we can sustain higher intensity exercise later on. And so, and when we talk about building up or increasing the capillary density and increasing the mitochondrial density, these are proteins that need to be built. We need to actually build the capillary system. We need to actually build mitochondria, and this takes weeks to months to happen. And so this is why we need a really long amount of time in comparison to the high intensity training. We need a really long amount of time to add in and incorporate low intensity, long duration training into an endurance training program if somebody ultimately has the goal of getting faster, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, because why would we run slow to run fast? Well, this is why. We need those slow twitch fibers to adapt to higher capillary density and higher mitochondrial density, so that when we are incorporating higher intensity training and when we are reaching that threshold of blood lactate accumulation, there's a lot of different words for that too. There's lactate threshold, there's anaerobic threshold, there's onset of blood lactate accumulation, whatever you want to call it. It's ultimately a rise in acidity in the blood because of that free floating hydrogen ion, and we need to take care of that. And but we can mitigate that by taking it a step back, and before we even get to that lactate, we can take that pyruvate, and if the capillary density is high enough, and if we have the oxygen concentration because of the capillary density, and we have somewhere for that pyruvate to go because of the mitochondrial density that we've built up with that low intensity, long duration training, then once we get to the high intensity training, our pyruvate has somewhere to go. It can get to the mitochondria, and we can actually work for longer periods at higher intensities before that pyruvate actually gets to that lactate stage, and our body needs to then do something with that. So that's a bit of a long way around, I realize, and it does kind of go back to the basics of muscle physiology and biochemistry, but if we train at a higher intensity and we haven't built up those necessary capillaries and mitochondrial density that we need to sustain higher intensity work, then we're likely to kind of hit a brick wall with that high intensity training if we haven't put in the months of lower intensity training work first. And so at that, we often run into a wall, and then often what we think is, oh, we need to train harder, we need to train faster. No, we actually really just need to go back to basics and do the low intensity training for longer periods of time. Okay, I hope that wasn't too nerdy for you on a Friday. That's what I have for you today. I hope you really enjoy your day, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.